Hi everyone, Thursday again. Yes, we got the right day of the week again this week. So welcome to those of you that are existing people that have been on here for quite a while. Welcome back. To those of you that are new, we're going to spend the next hour going through that stuff. So Capture One, which is the software that we use for editing images. So we take the raw data that your camera produces, put it through an image processor such as Capture One, and hopefully come out with something better. Sometimes we come out with something worse, which we'll try and address in today's session if that occurs. But the idea is that we can take that data and we can improve images. We can get some of the atmosphere back. We can get the feel of the image back. And that's what we use a raw processor for. So for those of you that have been on here for a long time, including the loads of you that are from Dorset, which is weird because I'm literally sat in Dorset right now. So to those guys, hello. Yeah, I don't know where you are, but Dorset's a pretty big place. But you all seem to be here online, which is kind of cool. And for everyone else, just please make this interactive. And by that, I mean, if I do something that you don't understand, or I do something that you want to know more about, then please put it in the comments. We can try and address those questions as we go. This isn't a just me do stuff and you watch. It needs to be interactive to make sure that you guys get the most out of it. So for those of you that are new, we're going to run through the version of software that we're going to run through today. And actually that's an update today to version 14.4. So 14.4 is released, what's on the clock? About 3 hours ago. There we go. To the point where some people have found that the server crashed when they sent the thing out. It happens sometimes on a brand new release because lots of people click the button at the same time. But if you go to capture1.com, go into your account, or go into the update function within Capture One, you should find a new version if you're on version 21, the latest version. If you're on version 20 or previous and have what's called a perpetual license, so you own the license, you have a choice to upgrade or not. At the moment, from memory, it's still going. If you buy version 21, then you get version 22 for free or included. Let's use it that way. That should be a hint to people that 22 is around the corner and on its way. If you're on a subscription, it's included. That's what you pay every month for. So please go on and download it. And if you don't have Capture One, finally, go to capture1.com, download the free trial, works for 30 days. There's no limits on it. You can play to your heart's content and follow along. If you're on a previous version, you might struggle to find some of the features that we're talking about, but most of them will apply to version 20, slightly less to version 12. There was a big gap in between. And obviously, as you get older, less and less. But there we go. Let's talk about version 14.4 first. So this is the version which has its own hashtag that Capture One put out, which is export tab is back. We'll talk about that in a second, but effectively, if you want to be able to export your images without going into a second or separate dialog box, which is what was put in version 14.3, keep getting the numbers mixed up, then 14.2? Well, one of them, anyway. Then 14.4 brings your export tab back. If you don't know what that means, we're going to run through it in a second. But it's not just that that's updated. So what you've got in there is now Sigma tethering for a couple of their cameras. You've also got, and it's a minor note in the release notes. And actually, as an aside, today we're going to be running 14.4. As I say, it was released 3 hours ago. If you're running a professional environment or a commercial environment, or you're very, very precious of your images and so on, test before you need to use something in the real world. So don't do what I'm doing today. So what I'm doing today is taking a new version as of 3 hours ago, and we're going to use it live and broadcast it. I'm pretty comfortable with this version, but I'm just saying be careful in general. Don't necessarily go and be the first to upgrade if you're about to do something very important that same day, that same week or whatever. Take the time to test it. But catalog speed is a big one in this one. So once you've got a catalog open, going into new collections and new smart albums and so on is massively sped up. So on Windows, you've actually got the upper hand on this one. So I think it's on some things they've quoted 500%, on some they've quoted 600%. Either way, it's 5 or 6 times faster loading in a collection within a catalog. On Mac, I think it's 3 times faster, so 300% as they quote. There's also some magic brush shortcuts. So there is not, just to be clear, a magic brush eraser yet. But what you have got is similar to things like the speed edit keys and stuff like that, and the ability to change a brush size using modifiers. You can do the same now with Magic Brush, in that you can hold down, for instance, Control Option, left click the mouse, and then as you go left and right, it'll change the size of your Magic Brush. So the modifiers have been moved into Magic Brush as well to make things a bit easier and faster. Fuji in tethering, some of the cameras have now got the ability to change controls, even though that I was talking to, or David mentioned this earlier, even though the physical dials, it's quite clever, physical dial doesn't change. These are actually proper, turn the dial things. You can still change the setting while tethering in Capture One, and it'll go back to the physical setting once you finish tethering. So that's quite nice. For those that were worried about the export tab, they will probably also be worried about the other tokens that were gone. So you've now got subfolder and job name, got to get them right, tokens put into the exporter. So they'll work across different recipes. Great. So you're able to control the naming of your files as they go out, spanning different recipes rather than being stuck on a per recipe basis. Great. There is some new camera lens support, but there's also bug fixes. So for those of you that saw, I think I had it once, but I've seen it on a couple of people's computers, it was driving people nuts. One of the bug fixes was, at any point in Capture One, if you hold down the space bar, it switches to a hand and you can move around the image. For some reason, in the latest versions, if you held down the space bar, you would get your computer beeping at you forever. That's been fixed. So it's a really stupid thing, but it's been fixed. And that's why things like that, it's worth A, reporting, so support.capture1.com. The more people that report it, the more likely they are to realize it's an issue. And B, checking the release notes with every single version. So 14.4 has quite an extensive set of release notes. Please read it before you go into the software and start playing. So speaking of going into the software, let's do that. Let's go into 14.4, so the latest version. And the first thing I'm going to cover is the export tab, which you will notice is missing. And it was missing from the previous version. Just one thing to bear in mind, the introduction or the reintroduction of the export tab does not mean everyone gets the export tab automatically. You have to add it if you want to. One of the reasons for that is, well, a lot of people actually are quite happy with the export dialog. So if you're happy with this way of working, this one is Joe's image, I think. Yeah, we'll come on to this in a second. But if you're happy with the way that the export works at the moment, click on the export button and you will get your little export dialog box, just like you had before. No issues. But if you want the ability to have it in a tab, and more importantly, you want the ability to have the batching run in the background, so in a queue, you're going to right click up here, add tool tab, and you'll find that export is now there. This is always applied to adding new tool tabs anyway. Remember, you can always add your own custom one. Kind of handy. If you've got, let's say you've got 4 or 5 tools that you always use in one tab, then create your own custom tab. But the export one has been put back. You can find it there. You'll see it's got this logo now instead of you used to have the 2 little cogs for process recipes. They're now called export recipes rather than process recipes. But you will find all of this exists, and you will also find the export queue down here, which you are able to stop again. So one of the big things that people had a problem with was with the new dialog box. While you were exporting, you were kind of stuck. You couldn't stop that export going on in the background, even with activity and so on. But now you can stop the export queue, you can restart it and so on. So kind of back to where export used to be for those that want to use it that way. So the traditional way or the newer sort of modal way. Either one, your choice. You can go for whichever one you prefer, but that's what's in 14.4. That's what you should be downloading now if you're on version 21. And if you're not, then have a look at what you want to do with upgrades or not. Your choice. I don't care. So let me just check, just in case someone has said I've downloaded it and it's broken everything. Yeah, press that. Windows 600, Mac 300. Yeah, but there was something else. I think I read, maybe it was a different note, but I saw 500 and 300. Anyway, catalog loading of collections and smart albums and albums, for that matter, is now 6 times faster on Windows and 3 times faster on Mac. That's pretty good. There we go. James, it's so much quicker. Good. It's good. It would be much worse if you'd said, no, actually it's slower. But no, it is, and I've checked it, it is quicker, especially, to be honest, on larger catalogs. It's doing well. Good point, Bill. Good idea to save your workspace so it doesn't get set back to the default. So if you have a custom workspace, or if you've moved your workspace around, maybe you've changed some tabs, maybe changed some toolbar stuff and whatever, go into your window menu and go to Workspace, and you will find, strangely, all of your previous workspaces in there. So those workspaces, as you create your own environment, they get saved. And as you move across between different versions, you can always go back and you can apply one of your previous ones. If you want to specifically save a set workspace, just save it as its own name here, and it'll go into your list of quickly accessible workspaces to flip between. A lot of people use that actually to flip between when they're using dual monitor. So if you've got a laptop, when you're docked in, you might have a dual monitor workspace. When you're remote, you have a single monitor workspace, for example. But do save the workspaces if you've got something that's custom for you. Alan, no, you're right. There is no support still for the RF2470. I don't know when it's coming. I saw there's a few people quite some time ago, actually on these sessions, had a problem with the EF 70-200 when you put the 1.4 extender on. It didn't recognize. That's now been included. So I saw that in the notes. And there are some Sigma lenses included, but I don't believe that the RF stuff has been done yet. When it will, I'm not sure. But yeah, either way. The export button, says Klaus, in the middle is not there and cannot be added. Not sure what you mean, Klaus. If you mean this one up here, if you're on 14.4, you should see under Tool tab. No, it's not an add tool. It's not these. Oh, actually interesting. Remember, all of these export parts of the export tab. So you've got the exporter tab, this stuff here. But you also have the ability not just to add the tab, you can add the individual export tools to whatever tab you want. So if you want those tools, let's say you want your watermark tool on your primary tab that you use all the time, you can just add it as a tool and move it around. That's part of the fun of the workspaces in Capture One. But there we go. I'm not sure, Klaus, if you want to change that, then let me know what's missing. We'll try and cover it. And David has just put a official note in. I said collection loading. All right, so I've just seen it incorrectly reported in a couple of news outlets. So official note from David. There it is. I think David's in Capture One right now, over in Denmark. But yes, the performance of the catalog improvements, so this 600% and 300% stuff, is relating to when I go between different catalogs, and these are obviously small things, but different albums, different folders, and so on, than the collections. That's the bit that's faster. It's not the original catalog load. That's still going to take the same amount of time to load. So don't get confused with that. Don't think that you're missing something if your catalog, the whole catalog still takes time to load, but going into those different collections is going to be a lot faster. Right. And actually, yeah, to Prasad's point, yeah, so the all images collection is faster. So if you just go into your up here, your catalog collection, it just says all images up there. This is a very small one, but if you've got one with a lot of images in there, it's going to be a lot quicker loading through than it was before. So that's 14.4. Your choice as to whether or not you want to upgrade. If you do, then it's in your account section in Capture One if you're entitled to it already, if you've already paid for it. If you haven't, then if you upgrade now to 14.4, you will get version 22, which is version 15 in software terms, for free or bundled when that's released. Okay, so Joe's question. Let's get on to some pictures. So Joe's question actually came out of the Facebook group a little while ago, a couple of days ago maybe, and it was about the layering of gradient masks and exposure change when you have multiple or many of them set in different layers. And to be really clear on it, people, unfortunately, we often use the words things like cumulative and combined and whatever else interchangeably. It's not a multiplier, I think, is the key thing in the traditional sense. So what I mean by that, and let's just, I'm going to go back to Joe's original shot, create a new variant here, and I'm going to create a mask and say a new filled layer. So brand new layer, filled layer, and we're going to reduce this one by, let's go for 1.5 stops. Okay. So we're now 1.5 stops darker. In fact, for maths, let's be really clear, let's go 1 stop darker, just so we don't have to do any complicated stuff with half stops and things. So 1 stop darker, great. What does that mean? It means that a pixel here now has a value which is half as bright, it has half as much light as what it did before that mask was put on. So that's double the light, that's half the light. So 1 stop, that's what we refer to as a doubling or a halving of light. So now what happens if I add another layer? Oops, sorry, let's add a filled layer. So another filled layer and do another -1. So the total effect is -2. It is cumulative in that sense. But -2 in stops doesn't mean effectively what trying to think of the maths. But the way that we work is a doubling or a halving each time. So a -2 is actually a quarter of the light of where we started. So it's half the light again. And it's half the light again because I've done -1. This is where the math is going to get really confusing if we're not careful. So the original here, 0. -1 stop on this layer, halve the light. So I've now got 50% of the light. Minus another stop on this layer, half the light again. The effect is I now have a quarter of the light that I started off with on my background layer, my original layer. If I didn't want to do it with 2 layers, I could, and let's just approve it. So let's create a clone of this variant, and I'm going to delete this layer, and this layer we're going to set to -2, and it's identical to this one. If I just let's create another one so you can see me flipping between the two. So this one has 2 layers of -1 each. This one has 1 layer of -2 each. They are identical amounts of reduction in exposure. The same would be true the reverse. So if it was +1 and +1, you'd have a doubling of light, then another doubling of light. So the net effect is a quadrupling of light, which is the same as +2. Okay. So now what about gradients? And this was where I think Joe's original question came from. So let's remove this layer here. Let's do -2 on a single layer for this shot. Now I'm going to create a new empty layer. And with the empty layer, new gradient, click up here, and let's just draw our gradient mask down there. Now, hopefully, those of you that are familiar with this will know. Those of you that aren't, what we have in a gradient mask is a 100% line, a 0% line, oh sorry, a 50% line, and a 0% line. And actually, on the gradient mask in Capture One, I can make this asymmetrical. So if I hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, I can grab this line, and instead of it being 50%, 50%, I can make it, you know, where are we? 75%, 20%, or 20%, 25%. Now, this layer with this mask, I'm going to also put in at -2. So what does that do, the compound effect of those layers? What it means is, down here, at this point down here, beyond the 0 line in my mask, so this being no effect down here whatsoever, I've got no effect from this mask, but I still have the effect from this one. So down here is -2 stops. It's a quarter of the light that was in the original version here. Up here, we've got not only this one, -2, a quarter of the light, but on top of that, we also have 100% of this mask, which is also -2. So here, we're at -4 stops, which again isn't a quarter. It means that we go 1 stop to a half, another stop to 25%, another stop to 12.5%, and then another stop to 6.75% of the light at the top. And if you think about it, at that 50% mark, so where we are here, then we're getting 1 stop of reduction from the top mask and 2 stops of reduction from the bottom mask, which means we've got 3 stops in total here. Now, I'm hoping that maths hasn't confused the hell out of everyone, but think about these numbers as literally additive or subtractive when you're adding masks on top of the other. So if you have a 1-stop reduction on a pixel, and the next layer has another 1-stop reduction on that pixel, you've reduced that pixel by 2 stops. If another pixel, say you're on a gradient mask or something like that, isn't affected by that second one, then this pixel's only reduced by 1 stop, not 2. But it is additive in that sense, it is cumulative. So if you have a 1-stop reduction and another 1-stop reduction, that doesn't mean a total of 1 stops. It means it has added each one on top of each other. And that's how you're reducing the image massively by adding all over the top. James, maths isn't my strong. Honestly, when it comes to stops and multipliers and whatever, it's it's painful. So the thing to remember is these numbers add to each other. They're not multiplying each other. So a 2-stop reduction plus a 3-stop reduction is actually a 5-stop reduction. It's not 6 stops. You haven't reduced it by 6 stops. You've reduced it by 5. It's 2 stops plus the 3 stops, not 2 stops times the 3 stops. Pascal, sorry. Yes. So it's a half times a half times a half. Yes, exactly that. So stops are either a doubling or a halving of light. So you're either going to divide by 2 for every stop that we talk about, or times by 2 for every stop that we talk about. And that's where we get to with stops. And Paul, I apologize. It gives me a headache as well when you have to think about it. But if you remove the stop theory, because the translation between stops and percentages gets a little bit tiring after a while. If you just remember that those numbers add to each other, not multiply, you won't go far wrong when it comes to exposure. Right, couple of things I guess. I think David's answered this one, but a question about Eip files, where to create them depending on a session or a catalog. Yes, so I'll just show you now, Jordan. David's actually answered it, but if I've got adjustments in a file, in a catalog, it's fine. I go to export. Let me just get rid of my viewer. Oh, that's weird. My viewer didn't disappear. Right. Go to export, but instead of just exporting, you go to export original files. In there, you will find a little entry in here, which is pack as EIP. When you do pack as EIP, it's going to force the fact that you're including adjustments. And whatever the file name is, so if you call that file whatever, that's what's going to come out as a .eip. The EIP is just this raw file, so the original file, plus these, in this case, 6 different variants. If you package up an EIP, what I get at the other end is your raw and all the variants you created from it with all their adjustments inside. The more variants, the more adjustments, the bigger the EIP is. But to do it, just right click on any of the files any of the variants within that file, export and go to original files and make sure that this tick box is in, and it'll force the adjustments one, and then you're done. Where are we, Jim? Yeah, the inverse square rule is exactly that, but it still does my head in even thinking about it. So right. Constant fun thing. Every time I restart Capture One, I always need to readjust my menu bar. That is weird. I'm guessing, do you have a saved workspace? If you do, it might be worth, and you're going to hate me saying this, but it might be worth cleaning Capture One off, removing your preferences, the preference files, and then trying to put it back on. I have seen it weirdly before. I didn't get to the bottom of it, but I know that cleaning out and redoing did actually fix it. Joe, now it's clear. Thank you. Thank God for that. Okay. So, because I don't want to explain it again because it does my head in. All you've got to think about is each layer just being compound. on top, but not unfortunately, it's because we deal with this doubling and halving. We think that if I add another layer on top, it's multiplying rather than halving and stuff. Okay, so with Joe's image, which is this rather cool, I guess, barn slash outbuilding, something like that, house maybe, I don't know. There are a couple of things I just saw on here, Joe. I'm going to pick on it just for fun because we've used it as an exposure demo. A couple of keyboard things for those that aren't used to it. So if you click on something and all of a sudden everything goes bright red and horrible, it's because you have a mask on and you've probably got your mask visibility turned on. If you want to do it quickly with your keyboard, press the M key, M for mask, M for no mask. Keep pressing it, comes and goes. Or up here in version 21, and this, so if you're on sort of version 14 point whatever with Magic Brush, you're going to find your mask visibility up here. If you're on a previous version, it's actually down here in the toolbar for layers. But you can choose in here to never display it when you're drawing the mask or always display it, and you see that M key hint for you as well. So if ever you go into a screen that's completely red, check that it's not just your mask, rather than the camera taking pictures of stuff that's red. Now, in terms of the rest of this shot, I looked, Joe, at your adjustments. So the mask, we've got good idea, base adjustment, so create an entire layer for most of your adjustments. Some adjustments you can't do on a layer. So for example, if I go to the details tab, you'll find things like the single pixel reduction is not possible to do on a layer. You can only do that on the background. And things like, black and white conversion happens across the whole image and things like that. But for most of your adjustments, it's a good idea to do them on an entire layer. Why? Because it means I can go into those adjustments later and adjust how much of that effect I want to use with opacity, which is really handy. So base adjustments done. There is a radial mask for the inside. And on that, we've got, I can't remember what I saw in here, funnily enough, a levels adjustment in here. Then we've got another radial mask for the outside. I'm not sure actually what that one was doing. It was oh, there we are, a -3 or 0.3 exposure, third of a stop exposure. And then we've got another radial mask, which is another exposure thing on here. And I think this was what Joe was trying to get clear. So the net effect of this mask and this mask, although they're slightly different shapes, for a pixel which is 100% affected, you've got a 0.6 reduction. 0.3 from this mask and 0.3 from that mask. In areas where the two masks overlap, in one's maybe 50% of it, one's maybe 30% of the gradient, then you might find the maths is a bit more complex, but that's what you've got in the overlapping masks. It goes from 0 in the middle up to 100% of 1/3 of a stop reduction in those masks. But I'm actually in a place of the mask at the moment covers the tree and the house, and I just wonder whether we could go a little bit stronger on the house and less on the tree, just for fun. And rather than a radial mask, what I'm going to do is, well, actually, we'll use the radial mask as it were, but I go to my brush, really, really soft brush, so no hardness at all. For once, and to be fair, it's to keep him happy, we'll use David's way of doing 100% opacity and a low flow, because I'm going to brush into it. Let's go to about there. And I'm just going to add in some extra masking. Now, when I go to click with the brush, the first thing it's going to say is, do you want to rasterize this layer? Why? It's because currently this layer is a radial mask. It's parametric, so it knows where it starts, where it finishes, and the percentages in between. The second I want to start painting the mask, it's got to transition that away from being a shape and into being pixels, dots, effectively. So when I start using a brush over the top of it, as it stands right now, we rasterize that layer. So the layer becomes as if I'd painted it, and I can paint some more and erase some more on top. So if ever you want to erase or take a chunk out of or add to a gradient mask, it's going to ask you if you want to rasterize it first. Yes, you do. You can turn this off. And then when you do, you're now able to paint. But what you're not able to do is go back to the radial mask and make any changes. The buttons don't appear anymore. So on this one, we're going to just add in extra bits over here, and I'm really going to darken out around here just to see if we get a bit more mood. And I'm actually going to erase some of this stuff down here with the foliage, because rather than using light for the focus on this, I guess, so rather than going from dark to light for all of the focus control, we're just going to use the fact that it is out of focus. Auto mask selected. Let's just turn that off. But we're going to use the fact that it's actually blurry and out of focus. And what I can then do on top of that, if you look at and think about, this is really, really rich in color, quite saturated, quite contrasty. Out here it's not. We don't want to make this rich and contrasty. It's meant to be in the fog. It's meant to be in the mist. But I don't want this distracting. So I've got two methods to do this. The first is we do it the contrast way, which is I'm going to draw with my brush a really, really soft layer again. No, we'll leave it at 100%. I'm just going to go right the way across this foreground, really rough, doesn't matter. And with that foreground, I'm going to pull down my contrast. As you pull down contrast, you might find it gets a bit lighter. And I'm also going to pull down clarity by a touch. Not this much. Don't make it blurry and synthetic, but we can pull it down a little bit just to knock it out. I might also pull down saturation a touch. And then if we want to make it darker again because we lost some of the depth in it, just a little adjustment in exposure. So that takes our focus away from here. If I do with that on and with it off, it's taking it away, pushes it more towards the barn. The other way, I'm going to turn this off, is, in fact, to make a point, I'm going to just create a new layer. I'm going to right click on this and say copy mask from the contrast way. So now I've got an identical mask, and we're going to call this the haze way. So we have the dehaze tool. I can pick on the color for out here. I'm going to now, instead of reducing haze, we're going to add haze. And this is possibly a more organic look than the old way of doing contrast in some ways. And to me, that starts to push the focus and attention back up to this hut up here. Joe's just said one of the eye to wander between the barn and the tree, so the rad mask on both. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm not disagreeing with the approach. I think it works if that's what you wanted to focus on. It's just, to me, I'm kind of in a place where removing some of that up here on the tree is probably a nice subtle way of getting the focus to the barn first, I guess, is my sort of gut feel. Get it to the barn first, and then the tree is the next obvious shape. But I kind of want the focus on that one to begin with. I'm just going to create one more little layer, call it barn. And bearing in mind what I just said about the mist, I don't want to push this too far, but we're going to use some opacity to fix this. I'm just going to paint on, again, a very, very rough area here. And I'm just going to dehaze that barn a touch. Now, you'll see, because I was rough, we've got some edges out here we might not want. Let's just use a really, really soft erase. And we're just going to pull these away. But more importantly, that's probably a bit too much in one go, just on the barn. So I'm going to add a bit of contrast to help it more naturally than dehaze, and then pull down my opacity. So I could, if I wanted to, do these less, but now I've got a bit more control. If I want it to pop a bit more, I can push some more, get rid of it, I can get rid of it. But I'm using opacity to control how much of the effect I've just dialed in we want to stick with. And I'm sort of in a place, and this is why I did that way, Joe. So here's your edit in there with your original rad masks and stuff. And here's where I get to, but it still needs what you had in there before, which is that overall mask. So you already had the radial mask outside here, and I can still use that, but even more now, to create quite a soft sort of cabin in the woods sort of look, I guess. Now on your main base adjustments, someone just said, where are we? Couple of things. Prasad, can we try the gamma slider in levels? So this here at the moment, this midpoint in the levels where we can make the image darker, or we can make it more bright. Literally, we're shifting the midtones to be into the lighter area of the histogram or the darker. Your choice. So we could make it brighter here, but remember, this isn't going to help with contrast in any way at all. Michael, do you think the bright white window frame is a bit harsh? I guess it could be. Yeah. Yes. Arguably. So let's have a little bit of a look. Let's use a magic brush, just because I think it should do a good job on this one. Why are we using a magic brush, not a color selection? Might be a good question. If I were to use a color selection, this is so close to white that we might end up picking up on some other colors in this area. I could use a luma range. That's one other option, but let's just see whether a magic brush selection is going to work. So on our window frame, magic brush. Of course, I can change these with the new settings. I don't want to sample the entire photo, just the stuff that I click on. Reasonable tolerance, because the stuff that's near to it is pretty dark. And quite a small brush. Let's just brush across that window frame. It's going to do a quick calculation. Whoa, too much. So too much tolerance. Let's undo that. Let's pull back our tolerance in here. Hoping this is going to do a better job this time. No. Oh, let's just pull that edge refining out. I think this will probably get it cleaner. There we go. So why was that happening? Let's think about it. You see this bit of the frame here? Just turn the mask off. These pixels here are very, very similar to these pixels here in the wood and these pixels in the window frame. So when my brush is going over all of this stuff, unfortunately, it's picking up the neighboring bits and thinking that should be part of what I'm masking. If I paint here where this is obviously different to the magic brush, it's going to pick up our window frame and do a pretty good job. If I want to really, really refine it, I can go in further into refine mask, and we can soften out those edges, or we can keep it where it was. The softening out, I don't know if you can see on the screen, we might find that it's going to pick up some of this wood out here, which we wouldn't really want. So let's just make sure it's not overspilling. And then with these, the white areas, what I'm going to do in the levels tool, normally we use levels to make whites whiter and darks darker. Instead, we can make the white value darker and less contrasty by shifting it into the middle. By doing that, you can see the color starts to change a little bit. It's gone from the sort of yellow, just undo it, yellowy white to sort of a bluey gray white. So let's head across to our color editor, pick on our color here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to increase that saturation a little bit just to push it back. Because as a result of pulling down the brightness values, we've also lost some of that saturation or perceived saturation. So then we get to there, which, so yeah, to Michael, your point. So, you know, very, very bright window, not so bright window, your choice, which one you prefer. But yeah, I think that kind of works. And again, because it's on a layer, we can pull this back with opacity without having to go back into masks and having to go into color editors and stuff like that. I can just say 100% of the effect or 0% of the effect and anywhere in between. So let's settle at 80%. Looks pretty good. So that's where I'd sort of get to, you know, your choice on the window frame, whether you want it more or less obvious, your call. But certainly from original, it's a slightly different shot. Looks a lot more moody and atmospheric. But yeah, I would pull that contrast away from here, Joe, personally, just so that the eye first off goes into that barn. Yeah, and Paula's point, yeah, so this is where two different eyes will see two different things. So yeah, Michael looks at the window and says it's distracting. Paula says, well, that brings my attention to the barn in the first place. Both are right. It's just whichever one Joe wants to stick with. Simon, is there a limit on the number of layers? I'm sure David will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is still 16. If I'm wrong, apologies, but I don't think that's changed from 16. You can have 16 layers in there. In my experience, if you've got 16 layers, it used to be that you'd have a new layer for most heals. So you'd have a different healing layer for everything you wanted to get rid of. You ran out of layers pretty quickly. With the new healing brush, and well, I say new, it's been there for a long time now, you only need one layer for most of your healing. So you pretty much, if you're hitting 16 layers, you're doing a lot of changes to that picture. So just be careful with it. Joe, there we go. The bright white window was bothering me as well. So cool, there's your fix. We'll send you back the EIP later on, Joe, so you can have a play with it. Okay, next up we've got Alf. So Alf's waterfall, and I haven't played with this at all yet because I was concentrating on looking at Joe's earlier. So this, what I want to do is just show you the before and after. So I've got two versions from Alf, this one and this one. Both are fine. If I look at them as they are, then, you know, it's okay. But then I look at the original, and it's so much crisper. The water's a lot more, well, watery rather than muddy, which is what I get from this one here. And what I'm seeing is, you know, talking about number of layers, I've got 8 different layers. One handy thing, name your layers, in part so that I know what you've done on each layer, but in part so that you do. You may remember right now what you've been doing, but, you know, in a year's time when you come back to this image because you want to make some changes maybe, you're not going to know what adjustment layer 4 did and adjustment layer 6 did. And I'm one of the biggest culprits for this. So, you know, don't think that I'm sat thinking every one of my images is named in layers, but it does help if you've got any changes to just give them at least an overview in the name of the layer itself. But as I look at this, it feels, and you know, Alf's point was he wanted to bring attention up to this bridge up here, and it's lost. And to be fair, I would say it's probably more aware of the bridge in the original than I am here. And the reason is because I've got so much data coming into my eyes. I've got so much texture. I've got so much contrast, so much color. I lose sight of what I'm trying to have as the focus, what I should be looking at first. It just becomes a bit confusing. So you're going to hate this, Alf. I'm going to create a new variant, and we'll start from here, because I'm also in a place where this composition's quite nice as well, with this stream coming off to the right hand side. So we want to bring attention up to the bridge. The first thing that I would, and again, everything I'm about to do is personal, it's my own view, it's not necessarily the right answer, it's just where I would come from, would be, let's pull in this crop. And I'm not sure whether we want even the bottom of this rock in here, but maybe we get to there. I want to lose that bit in there. And this starts already, because I'm removing some of, let's just create a new copy here, you can see. Because I'm removing some of this, already my focus is more likely to end up here. So I guess tip number 1 with composition, if you want to point focus to something that's not the most obvious feature, maybe just delete the most obvious feature. Which sounds flippant, but in this case, you know, you've got all this water down here, which actually, a few things. Number 1, it's a big mass of water down here. Number 2, it's off your focal plane. It's too close. If I look up here, we've got lovely sharpness in these rocks, but down here in the foreground, we're way out. So I'm in a place of, let's get rid of that. And then we've got some nice flow up here. So we've got the water flow up here that leads me up to that bridge. We've got this tree thing leading into it as well a little bit. But I've just got rid of this sort of mass of stuff, if I want a better word, but stuff in the foreground that's taking my eye away from what you want the subject to be, which is the bridge. So with that, we've now got a bridge which is, you know, more available to us or more obvious to us. Then we can use one of the radial masks. So I'm going to create a new layer and call it Bridge Radial. Sorry, before we do any of this, I forgot to do something. Creating a new variant, make sure, especially, you know, F11, F16, as we get into those realms, you might want to check and see if you've got some diffraction in here. And if you do, then put the tick box on and it sharpens it up quite nicely. If you've got any light fall off on the lens, if your lens vignettes quite heavily, you can use this slider just to brighten the edges a little bit. But we're not going to do that on this one because I want the opposite of that. I want to bring attention into here and away from the edges. So with my radial layer, new radial mask, and let's just make sure we've got our mask turned on. So always display mask. Drag that around here. The softer this mask is, the less obvious that it will be. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. And we're just going to pull that there and there. So a nice big radial mask. And with that mask, I can reduce our exposure. Now, the softness thing, I just want to show you. Let's say I reduce our exposure by 1.5 stops, just to make the timesing and multiplying more complicated. At the moment, I've got quite a soft fall off. I don't notice really there's a mask there. If I make this mask less soft, and what I mean by that is these lines come closer to each other, I start to see that there is a mask. I start to see those lines around the edges, and it becomes obvious that we've put a radial over the top. So the softer you can make the radial, the better, just in terms of making sure the viewer doesn't see it as being masked and they don't see any lines around it. Now, of course, if you think about that mask, a huge amount of this image has now been darkened, and we can see that on the histogram. So although I want the outside to be darker, I don't want really the inside to be, well, the whole image to look depressed and moody. So I'm going to brighten the whole image. Before I do that, I'm going to turn on my exposure warning. You'll see why in a second. I'm going to create a new layer. And just like Joe did, we're going to call it base adjustments. So those base adjustments, because they apply to the whole image, because I did a filled layer, anything I do here applies to everything. And let's imagine I pull up my exposure. Now, as I pull it up, if I pull it up too much, the reason I turned the exposure warning on is because it's going to warn me if I push it too far. We don't want to be pushing it anywhere near the top of the histogram in this case. It doesn't make sense to. But we do want to bring it up a little bit in brightness. So at this point here, let's go, because my OCD will cause an issue with that. So the whole image has been brightened by half a stop, 0.5. Then on our radial mask, the outsides have been darkened by 1.5 stops. The inside hasn't been touched because there's nothing in here. So the inside here is half a stop brighter. All of this is effectively half a stop brighter, but because it falls off slowly, we're not getting the darkening effect quite so heavily as what we had before. And it has the effect of brightening this water as well. You might notice up here, we've got some overexposed bits. I'm not too worried about them. They're sky that was probably overexposed. There's no detail in this sky anyway. So whether it's white or really white, either way, it's overexposed. I wouldn't worry about those bits, but we do want to protect the detail in things like this random foam. Right, the water. Now these waterfalls look great in long exposure. You get all the lovely trails, but I'm sort of in a place of let's really emphasize them. And a couple of sessions ago, we did something similar. So let's create a new layer, new empty layer. I'm going to call it water clarity so you can see what we're going to do. And I'm going to use a pretty soft brush, 100%. Not too worried because I'm not actually attacking the water in isolation. I'm actually attacking all of the rocks as well that go with it. I'm not going to touch that foam, and there's a reason for that. I don't want that foam to become more of a distraction than it already is. And I have a feeling that was partly why Alfred moved the foam out of it, but I'm going to bring it back into the frame. With this layer here, with clarity especially, get into 100%. Make sure you're not overdoing stuff. If you start doing that, it's horrible. Don't do that. But, somewhere between 20 and 30, let's go 28. That's giving me all these strands now really defined. And it's giving the water to be a bit more bright, a bit more vibrant, a bit more contrasty. If I want to add some overall contrast, we can. So remember, clarity is a contrast adjustment of sorts. So we can just push that contrast a little bit, not too much. And then, of course, we've got in here this sort of browny color in that water. I could be very specific and try the water itself, but instead I'm just going to go overall with this shot and say, right, this color in here. So we use our color picker in the simple basic color editor. Pick on that color. It's identified that it's yellow. We're going to pull down the saturation and we're going to pull up the lightness. So if I turn this off and on, you'll see the difference that's made to the water. It makes that water pop. Now, that hasn't addressed the fact that the bridge needs some attention too. So I'm also going to add one final layer. I think final layer, maybe. Call it bridge. And we're going to create a nice load of contrast over that bridge as well. So let's just go into here. So there's my main bit of contrast. And then I'm going to use a low flow to just soften in the edges into it. So kind of like a reverse radial. In fact, I could have done this with a radial mask, thinking about it. There's an idea. But with our bridge there, we're going to use that same clarity tool just to bring, now again, don't do it too much, but just to bring a bit more, I guess, presence to that bridge itself. What we could do with the bridge as well is lift up those shadows. So just be careful, don't do it too much. Obviously, we've got a mask that's around it, so it's going to look obvious if it's done too much. But it does make sense if you've got light coming in down there, and we can see all that light coming in a little bit, then why not lift the bridge up a little bit more with that light as well? I might want to reduce the mask over here. Just notice this tree is getting a bit too much of it. So up there. Of course, I left the auto mask on my eraser. I need to turn that off. Okay, so we've removed the focus from this branch out here, but we've now got an image where I don't think you're ever going to beat that waterfall as a subject for the bridge. But certainly we can lead the eye up there more than where we started from to here. And I know, Alf, this is a very different picture to what you had. And if you wanted that sort of color, that rich, deep red color, it is possible to do it on the rocks. But what I'd recommend is you do it just on the rocks and not on the water itself, because it just makes the water look muddy. Your choice in terms of where you want to get to, but to me this just feels so complex to look at. Whereas just focusing on in part the natural colors, but in part some of the stuff that leads up there, I think is probably a better bet. Prasad just said the bridge needs to be leveled. It looks like it's slanting towards the right. I don't know if it. Yeah, I don't know if it is, Prasad. That's the only problem. It might not be, but let's assume the bridge should... some of it could be perspective, but let's assume that it should be level. Let's just use our Keystone Tool, apply that. Careful with your crop once you've done that. You don't want to make, or you don't want to add in any extra bits that have now been stripped out because of that keystone, but that's looking pretty good. Now it's... well, I don't know. Is it leaning? Is it not? I don't know, but one way or another, we can work on that later. I think the most important bit is getting the focused up there. Josie's saying warm up the image a little bit. Yeah, we can. So again, on my base adjustment layer, which applies to everything, we can just take our white balance and we can warm it up a little bit there. Remember, as you're warming, all of those cool tones in the water, you're now going to have turned a little bit yellow. So just be careful with that. Don't do it too much, or exclude, or do it on a layer that excludes the water if you don't want it to be quite so murky. I'm going to settle it sort of there. That'll do. Right, Pascal, if you make the inner ring of your radial mask too small, the area of interest will get darkened as well by up to 50%. Yes, yeah, it will. But the radial mask itself, let me just create a new layer quickly. The radial mask here, I don't have the ability to do it asymmetrically. So if I hold down the option key, it doesn't make a difference. It's always going to be 50 and 50. Whereas on the linear mask, I can change this. So just bear that in mind. You don't have that option on the radial mask either. Okay. Blendenstern, is there any way to access the source points of the healing brush if they're outside the crop picture? Yes, there is. It's painful, and you have to do the outside the crop thing first. We covered it last week. If you have a look at last week's session, that exactly is covered in there. But yes, it is. Unfortunately, it's a workaround, and it's painful. Sorry. Right. Next up, we've got a little bit of time to look at Bob's beach shot. So this is, let's go to the original. Here's the original. Looks very calm and serene. Here's the final. Again, calm and serene. A bit of enrichment. There's some saturation on there. There's some sort of color shifting in the sky. My gut feel is to just pull these back just a touch. Because I struggle a little bit with the saturation being quite so much on what should be quite a calm scene. And in fact, I'm almost in a place of, let's even pull that back to there. Of course, I can warm up the scene, but if I warm it up, remember, it's kind of similar to the last scenario. We get a little bit of a boost of saturation, especially in the yellows, as we start to warm up, and it can look a bit murky. So I'm in a place where this is probably a more comfortable scenario, but I've just seen Alf. Name my layer. Yes, name your layer. It helps, and you don't have to. You can do what you like. But honestly, having gone back to images a year or two later and thinking, "Oh no, what did I do on that layer?" It's really useful to have at least a clue as to what you've done on each layer for your own reference. So this one here, I've paled it down a little bit. We're going to play with color balance in a minute, but there is one other thing that's bugging me a bit, which is the lack of correct geometry. Well, not correct, it's wrong, but this is natural. I get it. But it feels awkward because we've come in so close to the beach in this crop. This line here becomes really important. So if we do want this crop, and you'll notice as you come further away, it becomes less of an issue. If I just rotate this, because it's not quite level, this line here becomes less of a problem because it's further away from the straight edge. When I get nearer to the straight edge, it feels more like a diagonal. There's a quick fix for this in this scene, which is the Keystone Tool. So up here, vertical keystone, horizontal keystone, or four-way. In this case, we're using the horizontal keystone, and this adjusts for perspective distortion as something goes away from us to the right or left. If you're above or below, you use the vertical keystone to correct for that distortion. So in this one, I'm going to draw that line on the horizon. We're hoping the horizon is level. And I'm going to cheat a bit because I don't think actually the edge of this beach was completely level. But let's just draw a nice little line there and hit apply. Now I have, and if I turn my guides on, I've now got a line across the horizon, nice and straight. This line here, nice and straight. And this line here, nice and straight. So I've got bands. And those bands feel like they're geometric. They feel like they're designed to be slices and lines on an image. Whereas here, and you'll see the difference now that I do this. So you see this feels twisted. This feels level. Twisted, level. Twisted, level. That's what I'm talking about when we talk about correcting those lines in Keystone. Because if you want this to feel like bold stripes, it needs to be bold stripes. And having one of them a little bit off, it loses something as a result of doing it. So if you need to rotate something, the whole image, just use the rotate tool, this one here. But if you need to pull one part of the image towards you, that's what the Keystone tool is for. And you can see in the crop, what it's done is pushed the bit that was nearer to us. So this bit here, pushed that away, and it's pulled the bit that was further away closer, so it's evened out those lines. Right, and then I'm looking at these stripes and thinking, I wonder whether or not we could actually go a bit bolder and go to sort of there even, to make it a bit more, I guess, a bit more bold. That dark line in the middle becomes more obvious the more yellow top and bottom that we've got, if that makes sense. I might be talking gibberish, but hopefully not. Finally, let's go back to, I'm going to use our background layer just for ease, but in our color balance, in fact, no, I won't. Let's do it right. Field adjustment layer, color balance, And I'm just going to pull our shadows to be a bit cooler, our highlights to be a little bit redder, and our midtones maybe up a bit warmer in there. Really subtle changes. So that's before, that's after. Really, really subtle. But hopefully that just sort of gives it a nice glow rather than the sort of quite deep yellows and oranges. Remember, this was our original. So there's quite a color shift between this and this. There is still a color shift to here, but it just feels a little more muted than anything else. So I'd sort of get from there to there, but absolutely, if you're going to make an image about horizontal lines, make sure they're horizontal. The way to do that is with Keystone. Right, I think we're pretty much done for today. So, a couple of reminders. Number one, make sure if you are on version 14 or 21, that you're on 14.4 as of now. It brings back a couple of old friends in tools and also has all of those changes and fixes and stuff like that and speed improvements. So good stuff. It's great to see they're still building on it, but do keep up to date. If you're not up to date and you don't want to be, that's fine. If you aren't up to date and you do want to be, 21 at the moment includes the upgrade to version 22, which is imminent, let's say. Quick reminder, David and I are still planning to be stood on a cliff top randomly, live broadcasting on the 19th of October. It will go wrong. You should tune in anyway just to see it go wrong. That's going to be just as much fun as trying to see it go right. But there's just so many pieces in that jigsaw that's just not going to work. But in the meantime, between now and next week, a little reminder, next week, well, it's not a reminder, new news, we're going to be on Wednesday, not Thursday. Hopefully, I say hopefully because I should be somewhere else on Thursday. So I will be online on Wednesday, normal time, as always, but just a day earlier. Keep an eye on that Facebook group in the meantime. That will give you a bit of a hint as to other stuff that's going on. And also, if you want to talk about any of these images, or 14.4, or download servers crashing, or Keystone, or David, let's just talk about David for a while, then tune into there. You've got a week in between now and next time I see you. Between now and then, send in your images. So you do that on paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. As you send the image, please include your name. And if you want to include the EIP with your adjustments in this session, you hopefully learned how. But between now and then, look after yourselves. Make sure you're doing what you're told by your respective countries. And I'll catch you later on. Cheers. Bye.